It is time to look into the slave schedules. I went digging and digging and digging into these different slave schedules for 1860 and 1850 to see if I can figure out who may have been the owner or the enslaver of my third great grandfather Lawrence. Also, for Israel Sr. So I kind of hit a little bit of a brick wall because, as you may or may not know, slave schedules most of the time, 99.9% of the time, it did not have the names of the enslaved people. They only had their gender and their age. That's it. And of course, who the enslaver name was and the location in which this was taking place. So this is when I remembered some advice I got in the Facebook Black genealogy group to look at my white DNA connections. And I also remember that not everyone was enslaved on a plantation. Some people could not afford to have a whole plantation. Some people were enslaved on farms where there were maybe only 1 to 3 slaves. And some people also rented enslaved people. Something to consider. So this is when you start looking into appraisal records. This is when you start looking at the tax records. Taxes are very meticulously kept. So I went back to my DNA matches because I do have white DNA matches, and I also have Scottish and English blood from my mother's side. I looked into my DNA matches, did the filters again, DNA matches with public trees, who also have the name Hamlin in their family tree, with the common birthplace being South Carolina. I found a couple. And 1 or 2 in particular that led me to how we're related. I found in 2 of my DNA matches that I can remember off the top of my head that they were related to a Thomas Barton Hamlin. When I looked at their family tree and I looked at my family tree and I saw what Ancestry said the DNA connection would be, and I also need to confirm this when one of my grandfather's siblings gets a DNA match, but this person, if my speculation is correct, from tracing both of our trees back and looking at the timelines parallel to each other, Thomas Barton Hamlin from Georgetown, South Carolina, he may very well have been the enslaver and or father of Israel Hamlin Sr. And through this, I found my 5th great grandfather. What I learned about Thomas Hamlin is that, Thomas Barton Hamlin. Thomas Barton Hamlin was a overseer for 20 years, and then he became an enslaver. And by 1850, 1860, he actually enslaved about 42 people, which means this man was incredibly wealthy. He had enough to have 42 enslaved people. That's a lot during that time in that state, right? I need to figure out who is he an overseer for, because maybe Israel was born during that time or conceived during that time. And then I need to find his appraisal records. So that's where I'm at with Lawrence's people and Israel's people. That's where I'm at. I would like to read the obituary that I found for Thomas Barton Hamlin. Departed this life on the 9th of May, 1860, at the residence of his son-in-law, B. Marion Greer, Esquire, Thomas Barton Hamlin, in the 72nd year of his age. Born on the 15th of October, 1788, and exhibiting early in life a passionate fondness for hunting, he lived a life of hardy exposure. For many years he devoted himself faithfully to the duties of an overseer, but latterly he settled with his promising and thriving family in the pine lands of Georgetown district, where, without anyone to say him nay, when disposed to roost a turkey or trail the deer, He passed the remainder of his days an honest, independent, and dutiful citizen, a faithful friend and good neighbor. There he gave all his children away in marriage and saw them settled. Then, gradually relinquishing his habits of successful woodcraft, he loved the native forest in which he was wont to roam in pursuit of game, and he loved too their almighty creator. His constitution yielded to the effects of incessant toil and exposure from early dawn till night, and with a consciousness of the end awaiting him, he breathed his last calmly, under the watchful care and in the arms of his children, at peace with the world, and I trust with his God. The writer knew him well, possessing all the sagacious and generous qualities of the forester. There was no citizen soldier more earnest and efficient when on duty, patiently enduring, perseveringly active, and intently watchful than he. I was able to trace back Thomas Barton's tree, and turns out he is a direct descendant of one of the earliest Hamlins that came to the Carolinas by way of Barbados from England. In about 1696, there was a Thomas Hamlin who voyaged from England to the Americas and purchased, or was given, there's two stories. He either purchased the Copiahe plantation in Charleston, South Carolina from a sea captain, and the other story is he was granted this land, this plantation, from the King of England himself around 1696. Let me tell you a little bit about the Hamlins from England. They owned and operated many slave ships. They also enslaved a lot of people in specifically Barbados. So there's a whole family of Hamlins in Barbados. And of course, in the Caribbean, not saying that they did not happen in the States, but in the Caribbean, there were a lot of revolts that scared a lot of people out of the Caribbean. So they ended up moving upwards into the States, specifically in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, where they established plantations and held strong to them well until emancipation. I was able to trace that first Thomas Hamlin in South Carolina all the way back to England. And in doing that, I was able to find my 10th great grandfather. That is how easy it is to trace back European DNA. That is how easy it is to trace back European ancestry, which is exactly why I make this more accessible for Black people. It's taken me 8 years to get to this point to just find Israel. And then once I found Thomas, my 5th great grandfather, Thomas Barton Hamlin, I was able to go all the way back to my 10th in 30 minutes. So it's fascinating. This is great, but it's also very heartbreaking how easy it is for some and how hard it is for Black people to find their people. But this is exactly why I'm doing this, and I'm here to help. So just a few recent discoveries that I've made is I found Israel Hamlin Sr.'s sister. I found a sister of his, and through a DNA match. Her name was Julia. I believe she was born in South Carolina and then sold off to Tennessee, which is where her lineage is. Israel's sister, Julia Hamlin, I also found that DNA match did not have English or Scottish blood either. That DNA match had Jewish blood. So whoever their mother was forced to conceive children with more than one person, unfortunately. Also, the DNA matches that I found for Joseph Hamlin, Lawrence Hamlin Sr., our 3rd great grandfather, his brother, Joseph Hamlin Sr., I found every DNA match that I had that were tied to him, his descendants, they didn't have English or Scottish blood. They all had German or Italian blood, which tells me Israel is not their father, but Sally is their mother, which tells me, unfortunately, Sally may have been violated, forced to conceive children with someone else, from someone else of German or Italian descent. I will just say this, please understand there has been a lot of romanticizing plantation relationships when in reality that power dynamic could never allow for a willing relationship. That was non-consensual. You cannot be someone having that kind of power over someone else and think that it was a consensual relationship. Absolutely not. That was a non-consensual relationship. Let's just call it what it is. An enslaver, an overseer, or just a white person who wants to have their way with an enslaved person, that's not consensual. Because if they said no, then what? So I have to find who this woman is. I have to find who this woman is. Israel's mother. I'm so curious, and I will find her. Another reason why it's been a little while since I made a video, I was actually helping someone else with their family tree, and that someone else was my best friend. Turns out my best friend of almost 16 years is my cousin. Go figure. I was looking into their mother's maiden name, and I found that I also had that name in my DNA matches. So it's a matter of finding out whether we are cousins through blood or through marriage. But either way, we're connected. Her people were from the exact same place that my people with her mother's maiden name in Sunflower, Mississippi. Go figure. How dope is that? Thank you all so much for being with me on this journey. I will continue to fill you in on my findings, and we'll take it from there. I believe that I could take a little break on the Hamlins, just a tiny little break on the Hamlins, so that I can focus on my mother's side of the family. And oh boy, what I have found thus far, we'll get into it.